to kick off the second half of the day. We have the session that I'm really excited to listen in on, and that's defense and dual-use investors. Are we at a cyclical or structural industry opportunity? So as many of you all know, right now, defense is probably one of the hottest sectors. And if you had asked me in 2019 if defense would have been a very interesting space for VCs, I would have laughed at you. And now it is probably one of the hottest, given Palantir, Anduril, Shield AI. We have an incredible set of investors here, and I'm very grateful that Justin will be moderating. Sir, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Oh, this is on. Hey, how's everybody doing? Good? So this is the post-lunch one, so we'd like a really active group here. This is, I'm not going to say the most active panel you will see, but just based on the conversation out there, I'm telling you right now.
The pregame was pretty good.
Get ready for action. Hopefully we're recording this. Anyway, so again, Justin Kraus. I'm a managing director at JP Morgan and have the privilege of running a business called Applied Tech, which is robotics, space tech, semiconductors, cybersecurity, but a lot of it is defense tech, and so really proud to be in this business and privileged to get to talk to folks like this and a lot of folks that are out here today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the panel introduce themselves somewhat quickly, maybe share a little bit of background, a little bit about the fund thesis, and then kind of go from there, okay? Sound like a plan?
Excellent.
Okay, Meg.
All right, I will kick us off. I am Meg Vorland. I am the co-founder and chief revenue officer at a consulting firm called Decode. We do work directly with the US federal government and try to make it easier for the government to adopt and scale emerging technologies. We also run an accelerator for emerging tech companies and then have raised a fund. So I'm the GP at Decode Capital, and we invest in growth companies, so late A's, B's, C's, that have commercial sector traction and are really looking to open up either their defense marketplace or open up their federal civilian marketplace. And so we make investments, $1 to $2 million checks in companies that we think we can really move the needle and help them on their US federal government use cases.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Brad Harrison, the founder of Scout Ventures. We're an early-stage venture capital firm that invests at the intersection of national security and critical technology innovation, most broadly defined AI, autonomy, robotics, drones, cyber, quantum as a sector, space as a sector, and power as a sector. We really focus on entrepreneurs that are ex-military, ex-intelligence community, and national labs. We like that because we think we have more of a shared vision of how to build these businesses with also kind of a underlying sense of service. We specialize in helping our companies get non-dilutive funding. It's been a big part of our strategy. We are currently a paid advisor to SOCOM. We work closely with DARPA. I advise the NSC and spend a lot of time kind of trying to think about where we're going to be in 3 years, but more importantly, where we're going to be in 2040. We have, our last couple of checks have been lead seed stage checks between $5 and $7 million, which is a long way from the first $15,000 check I ever wrote. So,
And even with inflation, that's still a long ways.
Good afternoon, Jeff Eggers, co-founder and managing partner of R2 Ventures. We invest early stage also in a thesis we term national resilience, critical technologies that are going to drive Western national and societal prosperity. Of course, that includes security, intelligence, and defense, which we're here to talk about. But we see it more broadly in the 21st century. We think sort of the battlefield obviously looks much different. It's going to include things that go from advanced electronics and manufacturing to energy and biotech. So we have a somewhat broader set of sectors. We do that with a team that was purpose-built with the credentials and background to understand that space, and that's what we offer our founders, is a team that not only knows this and invests in this, but lived it. The majority of our team are veterans and have government experience, came out of that world. And then we kind of overlay that with investment experience as well. I myself came out of the Navy, was in the Navy SEAL community for 20 years, sort of bridging both sides of 9/11. Wasn't very good at it, apparently, because they put me out into pasture, and I was more of an advisor at the sort of strategic level, doing policy and strategy. I spent 1 year in the Bush White House, 5 years in the Obama White House doing national security policy. Eventually got burned out and then came into the private sector and haven't looked back. We care about this community. We're really excited to be here. Not only does it make up our team, but we believe very much in sort of the need to support this community. One of the things that makes us probably most unique that nobody knows about, and it goes to our name, Risk and Return, or R squared, is we try to care for people that have served at risk and then do what we can to return things back to them. Specifically, we donate 50% of our GP carried interest to a foundation we set up that does veterans' mental health, fire, police, clandestine CIA, and so forth. But very, very honored to be here. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, let's dive into it here. And Meg, I guess I'll start with you. So clearly, and Tim alluded to this about just how hot defense sector has gotten, and the money that has come into it. And so I guess the question is, it seems so interest. Do you think, and obviously go down the panel here, is this a temporary time of this heightened attention, or do you think that it's an actual long-term shift in specifically venture activity?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So I think that when we look at the arc that we've been seeing over the last 10 years, if you look back to 2015, we had a lot of companies in tech that were saying, I don't want to do business with the government, and I don't want to do this type of business with the government. I think over we've seen things like DIU, we've seen other really, really important initiatives, and a lot of waves moving in the right direction, in my opinion, in the right direction in the defense tech space. We started raising, this is our first fund. I'm less experienced than some of my esteemed colleagues up here, but we started raising specifically because we saw this as such a great opportunity. And I joke that we were right. So lots of people are now thinking that this is a great opportunity, and there is a lot more money going into the defense tech space. I think a few things that are really going to make it, because your question is really, is the money coming in going to stay? And are people really here for the alpha that they're going to get today, or are they really in it for the long term? And I think there's a couple different types of investors in this space. My colleagues on the stage here and myself are very, very mission-first investors. I think we know the space really well. We talk DoD, and even, we talk Army, we talk at the service level, and I think those types of investors that can really be high impact for your companies, I think those are going to stay. Those are here, they're going to stay. I think the challenge and the bubble that has actually been created more recently is with money coming into the space with not as much of the resources put behind it, and not as much of the time and energy. We heard from some of the entrepreneurs before, you're getting a partner when you're taking on investment, and some partners are more throw money at the problem, and some partners are really help you along. And I think in the defense marketplace and in federal writ large, you really do need a partner that is able to help you along in this marketplace, because it is, many of you know, when you come out and you try to sell back in, it's a really, really challenging marketplace to be able to get those first wins and get the traction, and then also be able to scale.
So I think if you look at the macro geopolitical landscape and start there and realize that, the use of mass is a primary principle of war, and we cannot compete with China. We don't have the manufacturing, we don't have the design, we don't have the raw materials. So we are at a critical point in time from a national security perspective that now, when we were talking about this in 2016, 2017, part of the reason we were so interested in dual use was we knew that the economics of being an early stage investor were really, really challenging. But if I could get non-dilutive government funding, which basically free leverage on my money, and then I can leverage relationships to validate the market demand by going through the Pentagon and talking to the Department of the Navy, then all of a sudden, if we then work with Congress to put it in the National Defense Appropriations, and then we make these structural changes with the SBA, and now you're going to see a sovereign wealth fund, a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. And if you haven't seen who's running it, it'll be a surprise, but I would venture to say it's somebody with a DoD background. So I think we are in the middle of a national security issue, and the national security issue is why you're going to see structural stability. On the cyclic point, yes, the valuations have gotten out of hand, and so you're going to see a bunch of consolidation when you got a bunch of companies that either went DoD and didn't get commercial revenue, or contracts got delayed, or got commercial, but it's like a $5 million business, so nobody in venture cares about it. So I think a wave of consolidation, you're going to see good IPOs in the space. I don't know if anybody saw today, Palantir was over $100 a share, right? That is good for us. Anduril was valued at one point at $22.85 billion. That was the biggest secondary I saw. SpaceX went from being at $135 billion last year to selling at $350 billion. And NVIDIA has reached a max of $3.3 trillion. So the ability to make the type of returns that everybody wants to make is there, just based on the landscape.
So when we prepped for this, I told Justin I didn't know what I was going to say, but I would say the opposite of whatever Brad says.
Navy guy.
Which is what you get when you put a West Point guy and an Annapolis guy on the same stage, which is one of the fun things about this community, is this keeps happening. When I left government 10 years ago, I testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee on this topic. Then Senator McCain, and ironically, it was the day before Army-Navy, and you had Senator McCain who's the chair, Annapolis guy, and you had Jack Reed, who's a co-chair, West Point guy. So it keeps happening. But the hearing was on Goldwater Nichols 2, which was McCain's thing that he wanted to sort of be his legacy, that he was going to rewrite how the laws, the defense acquisition laws about how the defense procures technology and so forth. So I was one of the witnesses. That was 10 years ago, a series of hearings. And I bumped into Jack Reed a week ago. And I sort of, shared a laugh with him over how little things have changed on that front.
That's encouraging.
Right? That in fact, unfortunately, Senator McCain was not able to rewrite those laws. We still have, 5 colors of money. We still have 1-year funding. We still have mostly cost-plus contracts. It's still a very tough system to navigate. However, like Tim said, it's night and day in terms of, the sort of the aura of defense tech investing and the amount of capital that's flowing here. So the question there is, like, what do we make of this? Like, how do you reconcile this, right? Is Anduril an N of 1? And I think it is. But if it is there still opportunity for the rest of you? And I think there is. So, I think part of what we should be discussing here is how do we reconcile this, right? How do we start to understand this? And I will say, when you ask, is it cyclical or is it structural? I think it's cyclical, almost like in the way the old Lucy Charlie Brown football, comic. I'm going to get it this time, right? And then the football goes away. And I know how that's a lot of our founders feel. But I think it is becoming more structural. I just by coincidence, I was catching up with Doug Beck this morning, who's the director of the Defense and Innovation Unit, which in many ways is a reflection of the fact that we're getting a little bit more structural about this. And, from his point of view, is we've hit, as he would say, escape velocity, which means the system isn't fixed yet, but we're not going back. There's too much awareness that the technologies that are going to make us secure and safe are not going to come from government labs, and and they are probably not going to come from government primes. They're going to come from venture-backed systems in the private capital markets. Now, and that's where we're not going back from. Like, that's the point of agreement. Now, fixing everything so it's easier to live up to that reality, I think, is really the big question for us.
Well, I just think it's important. I want to touch on the dual use aspect as a level set. So the problem with being government first is every time there's a continuing resolution, your bucket of money is at risk. And so the only way to protect yourself is to either be able to fund yourself for long enough or develop commercial. And when you actually talk to the government, they feel much better if you have commercial customers. So where you can develop the use case for both and have, the greatest social good across society, I think it also buys you the time to develop the way you need to develop. The second thing is that all of these organizations, whether it's DIU or DARPA or any of them, there's a fundamental change in their willingness to engage and have conversations about what they need to solve. And in the case of a Naval Academy grad that we backed at a company called Havoc AI, which is, probably a Saronic competitor. I know Dino, I'm supportive of them as well, but we spent 6 months talking to everybody within the Navy. What do you like? What works? What do you want? What would be best case? What are the conditions? I mean, I was having conversations with what the buoy time was in the South China Sea, informing how long the boats needed to be to optimize, energy usage on electric. But the difference is, 5 years ago, those people in the Navy would not have those conversations. They were closed in the Pentagon. They had their heads down. And if they had a question, they called whoever their prime is. They all not only made time for us, but within 3 months of writing that investment in Havoc, every single one of the people we talked to at the Navy went to Rhode Island, saw a live demo, and at month 4, we sold 10 boats to the Navy and shipped them to Portugal. That is a structural change that a small could have never done 5 years ago.
So, you add something to it?
Yes,
Go.
always.
It's all you. Go.
On the structural change, we've seen this so many times where people are buttoned up about what their requirements are or what their actual needs are, and I couldn't agree more that you're seeing more and more and more openness around it. But where I will kind of insert here is that we need those units and places, the PEOs within the Navy, to be able to not just rely on something like DIU. If we're at escape velocity here, we need to bring it back into the services, and so they need to start being able to either ask those questions or have the authorities. So lots of people go to DIU so that they can have OT authority, and we need to figure out how to do this within the FAR or fix the FAR. Those are the next structural changes that need to come, because if we have all of our innovations sitting up high, reporting to the Secretary of Defense, where are our services in providing those requirements? We hear from the folks on the ground all the time that they're saying, well, we can go to DIU, but we have all of these other constraints. And so really fixing, I'm excited to see the next jump in the structural fixes as service members really figuring out that they have what they need today. They have waivers, there are authorities, and that we need to start using them more broadly across the department.
I wanted to add that I think the other really interesting thing, how many people here served? Okay, that's awesome, as did I. I think what's really crazy right now is, you're gonna have this wave where being able to get to the PEOs is gonna get easier than it's ever been, right? So, there's a couple other firms in here that have the same relationship with SOCOM as I do, and that's because they're asking questions. But I think the part that is really interesting, and I don't fully understand how it's going to happen. But as we add this new technology and this new autonomy, it is going to require total changes in doctrine on how we fight. You know, I was talking to the 101st, and they always had the doctrine of deploying their scouts and pathfinders 48 to 72 hours in advance, eyes on the LZ, and then, you know, you bring the unit in. Well, they don't have scouts and pathfinders anymore. So they asked me if I could build those with robots and put them on Black Hawk wings and drop them out of C-130s. And the answer is yes, we can, but the fact that our doctrine of how we fight is changing. You know, Admiral Paparo, who runs Indo-PACOM, you know, he said the same thing. He's like, what do we do to honor our security agreement to the Philippines when the Chinese rammed the Philippines Navy 5 times last year? How does that impact us? Well, now maybe we put drones in front of them, so they ram the drones, so it changes where the soldier is in the kill chain. But I think you're going to see soldiers getting pushed way further back, and so I think that's going to change the way we think about how many F-35s do we need? How many, you know, big aircraft carriers versus, you know, aircraft deployers of autonomy, right? Where there are no, you know, and instead of 5,000 people on that boat, there's 1,000 people on that boat, right? Because recruiting is down to an all-time low. So that's part of what we're structurally going through as well.
So, Jeff, I guess thinking about like technologically, America, we can do mostly anything, right? We capture rockets with chopsticks. We have humanoid robots, right? I mean, so as you can imagine. But the procurement process, which is maybe the least like technologically advanced thing, how much does that become as you think about, and Brad, hopefully you'll disagree with this, but with whatever Jeff says, but how do you think about that barrier to this wave of defense that we're seeing? Is procurement need to be fixed in order not to have bad outcomes with this wave?
You know, 100% it has to be fixed. I mean, and when we started our Squared, we went on a listening tour to gather ideas about how to do this and how to structure this. And I talked to a lot of the old folks from government that I worked with. You know, I worked for 4 different national security advisors across my 2 different stints. And I checked in with one of them who's still active in this outside of government, and he said, none of this will work until we fix the procurement and the acquisition system. Now, that's sort of the extreme view on one end. And I think we've actually proven him wrong, that some amount of it can work. Now, the way most of you hopefully can get around this, for the founders in the room, is the dual use approach, right? Now, dual use, I think, has become a weird term that for some people almost means, well, we want exposure to this sort of growing opportunity in defense technology, but we don't want to be exposed to the risk of people that are real defense tech, because we know how hard that is, right? Like, we don't want a portfolio of just companies that are doing hypersonics and have no commercial opportunity, because that's really scary. So we're going to do dual use, right? That's a little tongue-in-cheek. And I think if you are truly dual use, then that's a blessing. You should run with a lot of humility and agnosticism about how it's going to play out, because we see it play out different ways. If you're truly going to market with that dual use strategy, sometimes it's going to play left, sometimes it's going to play right. I think you'll get surprised, and we've seen that. Now, if you're at the whim of the procurement system and you're not dual use, you really do have a genuinely sort of one, you know, government market you're going after, it's a real problem. And it's not going to change fast. There's chatter again about sort of going back to McCain's ideas, but it's going to take a while, right? In the meantime, what do you do? And I actually think your point about the chopsticks is relevant insofar that, well, what did SpaceX do? Well, SpaceX is a little different. It's not just selling to government, of course, but one of the great case studies in SpaceX that's available to a lot of you is, and Meg mentioned this, is the use of sort of different authorities. And very specifically, it is OTA. SpaceX is where it is today because of its ability to leverage OTA, which is sort of, it's not a workaround the procurement system and getting to a program of record, but it's pretty good in that way, right? Whether it's advanced market commitments or milestone payments, it is there, it is real, it is there today. We've had this discussion with the senior levels of government, both pre-inauguration and post. The real problem right now is there's not enough people in government know how to do it. But don't let yourself be the problem. Make sure that you're up to speed on where that is, and you can get a leg up on this procurement problem.
So go ahead, Meg.
Really quick, double tap on don't be part of the problem. So you have to be maybe more knowledgeable about the procurement system than the KO that you're working with. You definitely have to be more knowledgeable about the procurement system than the program manager that you're working with. You have to help guide them to some of these options. So really understanding how to get there. Do not rely on them to show you the yellow brick road that will lead, to lots of money, because it's just not going to happen.
And, there was a structural change last year, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it allows you to now use these OTAs to do like hardware as a service with like software licenses. So the ability to buy different products with the OTA just got a lot broader as well. And part of that has been kind of the evolution.
Anything as we go through? Anybody want to jump in on any of these points? Any clarification? Some really good stuff here.
I actually have one thing to add. So one other thing that we were talking about outside beforehand is the role of Washington, D.C., and how that not only impacts your ability to get money through federal programs, but also how the appropriations are moving down to the state levels. In states like Florida, Colorado, Texas, they've stood up space commissions, and those space commissions have state revenue, and they're providing those for grants to different space companies. So I'm an investor in Voyager Technologies. Voyager is a Colorado company. However, Starlab is based in Texas. So we're talking to TARSIC, which is the Space Commission in Texas, to try to get money to go into that company. So understanding both DC and state level programs, again, part of this are the new structural changes. The creation of something like the Texas Space Commission relevant to that. So I think you also have to look at, depending on what vertical you're in, what are these new vehicles that might be emerging to help give you alternative funding sources that didn't exist prior.
So what about, and Meg, maybe we start with you, and this goes a little bit back to the dual use question that came up before. As an investor, and obviously you do more than just investing, but as an investor, are you, do companies need to be dual use when they come, or are you willing, and I'd love all you guys to opine on this a bit.
Yeah, our specific thesis is that we are working with private sector technology companies that are looking to go into the government. It is our specific thesis because Decode Capital is built upon our advisory firm where we work with those companies, so that's our deal flow. And we thought about this a lot in that was our key differentiator. That's where we had our deal flow. That's where we thought we could help the most. But to your point, I think we get companies all the time that are in the hardware space, that are in places where not just critical technologies, but also places where we don't want to be buying those manufactured parts from China. And we would love to be in that space. It happens to not be part of our Fund One thesis, but we tend to, it's a small venture community, we tend to actually refer those companies to folks who do a lot more hardware and who do just a lot more in the manufacturing space and beyond, because those are going to be really, really critical needs moving forward. And because we're all kind of in this together, we want to make sure that everybody gets to see those really great technologies early on.
Well, and in the supply chain, if anybody here wants to go build brushless motors, ground controller electronics, 80% of that is made in China. And the stuff that we buy in the US is not economical. LiDAR cameras, for example. So you want to use true autonomy, you either need to use so many different cameras. Well, the Chinese make a LiDAR camera for like 30 bucks. So how are we going to compete with attritable autonomy when the US LiDAR camera is $5,000, right? So I think if you're thinking about the places to get involved, I think the critical components of the supply chain, and like you don't have to reinvent it. Like hire somebody, go over to China, see how they're making their motors, come back, talk to your senator, get a grant, start building motors, right? Like literally basic things. And so for us at Scout, you know, we're looking at rare earth minerals. We're looking at plasma reactors that vaporize, you know, garbage and pull the silicon out and sell it to chip manufacturing in the US. Like that's the stuff that we're looking at, because we see when we're building autonomy companies that the biggest problem is a fucking $30 brushless motor. That is like literally going to be the thing that stops us from competing. I mean, that's insane to me as America. So, you know, if one thing comes out of this, understand, identify the key shortcomings in the supply chain for us to be able to build all the cool shit you want to build, because without that, we are going to fall flat.
Still on dual use?
Yeah.
I mean, and I spoke about it somewhat from the cynical point of view earlier, and I don't mean to convey that because that's not how I see it. You know, I think there was a transition period where a lot of people were sort of working with that narrative. I think where it is now is that it's not only here to stay, but it is a great opportunity, not just for the investors in the room and in the world, but for the country. And I say that because, you know, broad trend-wise, what has happened is, like I said at the beginning, the critical technology R&D is no longer the exclusive domain of government, right? This was the thing that was staring us in the face when we couldn't bring the astronauts home with Boeing. We had to turn to SpaceX, right? Like that, you know, was a sort of, you know, single example of what is really the broad trend that is here to stay. But when you sort of peel it back a little bit, you can start to see why it's happening. I mean, you know, the really advanced stuff, whether it was advanced compute, advanced chips, advanced communication, if you were in that world, the government was your customer, right? Because that was the people who bought the super high-end advanced stuff, right? And that's now no longer the case. And that's very clear with chips, with compute, with communications. But you can imagine it's going to continue. That broad trend is going to continue, right? And I actually don't even know where it stops. And maybe hypersonics was a bad example. Maybe energetics is a bad example because, you know, the commercial opportunities for those things are probably, if not here, and I just don't know about it, soon to come. So I think if you are genuinely in dual use, you genuinely have a real opportunity just because of this sort of very strategic and seismic shift that we've all watched over the last decade or two.
What, real quick poll, how many folks here are founders? Starting income, okay, so good. So it looks like the majority. So for me, and look, I work for a bank, so like your job's a lot harder than mine. This is like so complicated, right? I mean, not only do you have to have a great idea, you have to build a great technology, right? Find a demand pool, convince investors to support you like these folks. It's so complicated and to get from point A to point B, let alone point Z, right? Or whatever it is. You've worked with very successful founders. I mean, you just mentioned a couple great companies. What is like a piece of advice for these founders navigating an insanely complex world that like either it's a core competency you see in most founders that are successful, or in this particular space, let's call it dual use or selling to the government, that a founder needs to have in order to be successful or to continue to take the steps?
I mean, I'll start. I would say if you want to be in the dual use space, you really have to listen. You really have to listen to the demand signal. You have to listen to what the client is telling you. You have to listen to what the warfighter is telling you. You have to listen to how the National Defense Appropriation Act is looking at that vertical. And I think, you know, I've been working on my listening skills a lot over the last few years. But when we went in and did that Havoc story with the Navy, we spent a lot of time asking questions and sitting back and listening. And that was the superpower in informing like 5 of our investment decisions. It wasn't what we thought was the theme. It was like we kind of had an idea where the shock group was, and we were super blessed to use our military, our academy, our professional networks to go ask the questions of the right people and be good listeners. And that is really what allows you to do great things.
Yeah, on that, and I said, you know, you have a little bit of humility about which way it's going to go, and Brad's saying the same thing. You really have to sort of be listening to what the market and the customers and so forth are telling you. Like, we have 2 companies that when we went in, dual use, you looked at it and you thought, you know, just first principles, oh, this one we're going in because, you know, the government use case is massive. The government needs this. This is going to be a huge government success. Yes, there's a commercial side, but and the other one was the exact opposite, where we thought, okay, they got their, you know, toe in the door, selling to the Air Force and doing DoD work, but the commercial use case is massive once we get that side. And in both cases, we were totally wrong about where the real adoption and sort of success would be. And we just wouldn't have known it at the time. And thank God those CEOs and founders were willing to sort of have that ability to pivot to where, you know, they were getting the signals and follow those.
And I would add 2 things. So on the listening side, it is not just listening. You do need to know where the appropriations are coming from. Your investors need to kind of have their ear on the ground, but really, really focused on what that use case is that's the best use case. I think we get a lot of times, we talk to companies, we're predominantly SaaS, so we talk to companies that are like, we could solve lots of problems for lots of people, and all of these people have all these problems, and we could solve all of them. And so really figuring out, I think, what you do best. I think one of the panels earlier said that, like, what do you do better than everyone else? What is your company gonna do better than everyone else? And then finding those people who you think might have that problem, who are the users that might have that problem, and then be able to, you're gonna have to network into them. You have an amazing network, look around, but networking into those people and being able to ask those right questions, and those isn't my product awesome, or don't you like my blockchain? It's much, much, much more about the actual problem you're solving, and really asking the right questions so that you're not getting the leading answers, and you're then able to build, and then you can take advantage of some of these other contracting authorities, where if you know that this is on your build and you know that you want to get over here, now I can use a SIBR to try to get there, and then I can use the phase 3 authority to get to a production contract, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but you have to actually find what the true need is there.
Okay, turning it over to you guys. So the mic is yours. What questions do we have out there for this panel? Because they definitely have answers. So what questions do you have? Yes. Go for it.
Hi, my name's Eric. The company called Key Square Labs. There's a bill in the Senate Armed Services Committee right now called the Forged Act, and one of the things it is thinking about doing is making the default for defense procurement from sort of a defense-specific item to a commercial item that might even be modified, but that becomes like the preference. It's a pretty big change. Big deal for my company because fundamentally what we do is we make software that seeks to delete a bunch of custom battlefield hardware and instead achieve those functions on commodity commercial hardware. So we are a software pure play. That said, how do you all think about defensibility of software in the DoD as it sort of starts to become more acceptable in procurement? Beyond patents, like if you think about the ways in which you gain and maintain your initiative in the commercial market in software, I don't know that it's all the same in the DoD space. So when you're diligencing a company that does software, what do you look for in the moat? And then maybe if it's a different answer, how do you think about maintaining that moat as they go forward in the DoD?
Well, I brought up Palantir earlier, and so I'll just use that. Palantir started, and they were pure DoD, and they kept banging on the door over and over again, and then they lost the $1 billion contract, which they then protested.
Sued the Army.
And then somehow got hired, okay? And now I think this quarter they did about 400-something million of commercial and 400-something of government, right? It's a huge dual-use business now. I think DoD doesn't really understand how to use software. And part of what they're doing now is they kind of trust Palantir to organize information. And so Palantir's kind of there to stay. How many people think that Anduril has actually been deployed with the Army? Well, that's pretty encouraging. Anduril has not even gone to JRTC yet. And I know that because its first live JRTC rotation is next week. And that's insane that they were worth $22.85 billion selling to the government, and they have not even been in the field. So I just used that to say this comment I kind of wanted to throw out before, but you should expect the music to stop, right? This is not going to continue where companies can go raise $1 billion, with one phone call from Joe Lonsdale and the 8 VC guys, and then the whole round is gone, right? That is going to come to an end because ultimately, as investors up here, we're all judged by our returns. So if we can't create the liquidity and make those returns, you're not going to see those huge, huge buckets of money. Could Anduril be a $50 billion company? 100%. 100%. So you can get there.
Yeah, I think there's a tension, right? Because the real opportunity space, both for the sector, for us, and as a nation, is in software, right? Like the marginal gains and opportunity swing is much greater in terms of what could be done there. Moreover, it's going to be more relevant, right? Like the quote, the front lines, the nature of conflict is going to be shifting to where it's less going to be about sort of the hardware and the kinetics, and it might be more about what sort of the software is doing in the background, what's happening in the RF space, and so forth, like these sort of new domains, if you will, and information, i.e. software, is one of them. So in some ways, it's the most important place to be moving the fastest, but Brad's point is really, it's one of the places where the department really still hasn't figured out how to do it. I mean, it knows how to buy hardware. It is still very difficult, right, to sell software to the building. I don't think that means you stop trying. In terms of the moat, I think there are some hacks. I think, there are people in the room who sort of know that. I think sort of playing the game to a certain extent on your own, but then partnering with others. We have a company that worked very hard to be the first that was IL5 compliant with their certain type of software. And you would have thought that would be a huge advantage, right? Because the government, the Pentagon, insists on IL5 to do certain things, and yet, their competitor, which is in many ways doing better, was able to do it with IL4 and some other. So, I think the standards are changing, the game is changing. I think you have to keep sort of innovating, and I think some of that can be done most effectively and efficiently through partnerships where you're working with others. In a way that allows a complementary arrangement that isn't super competitive.
I think the winners are going to be the ones who are best able to partner and pull capabilities together. I think there are a lot of people, a lot of companies in the space right now that are selling parts and are selling portions. I think use the Palantir example. I think Palantir is doing well now because they are partnering with others and they were not before. I think they've lost some of their bad rap because they are now partnering with others. And the government isn't inherently writing those RFPs or RFIs or whatever it is so for partner relationships. And the government tends to be not very good at being able to write those requirements for partner relationships. But I think companies will win here where they're able to pull together the full solution through partnering, and that's really, really difficult. And I think we see often a lot of general officers come up on stage and say, well, you have to work together. And you're like, yeah, but what does that even mean? Like, what do you need? But I think we'll see some of that shake out moving forward with the partners.
I also think one of the hardest things for the entrepreneurs in the room that are doing dual use is sometimes you get a really false demand signal from a colonel or somebody who you think is the decision maker and they're the head person and you invest all your time and effort and then they PCS and the person in the job doesn't give two shits about your project. Yeah. So finding the right long-term demand signal really, really makes a difference. And that's a function of not only down at the unit, at the user, right? You know, Larson Jensen from Harpoon's not here, but if you ever go to a Harpoon event, there's like at least 2 SEAL teams there, right? Like they super tight community, but they use that network in the commercial setting to validate demand signal at the tactical and the operational level. And so, you know, it gives them their ability to, you know, share that information to, you know, figure out which companies are going to make it. All right, sorry, you had a question.
And thanks for the question. And but I want to, Brad, on something you mentioned, we just published this venture report on State of Venture from 2024. And to Brad's point about, and the overall thesis of defense, and this is more broad tech, but defense, the way that money continues to get invested is that the LPs get their cash back. So last year, there were, and I have the numbers in front of me, 8 tech IPOs. 8. Like in 2021, which was too hot of a market, there might have been 8 in one day. Like there probably were a couple days with 8. The M&A activity, which of course is the other way, there were 1,009 M&A transactions venture back. Now again, that was slightly up off of last year. But the proceeds of that, which were 154 billion, were actually down from last year. Right, so you had slightly more transactions, obviously at a smaller ticket size. It just hits exactly what Brad said.
Yeah, venture distributions in 2024 were down 83%.
Yeah, I mean that's the lifeblood, the DPI. I mean that is exactly.
We distributed 60% of our Fund 3 back, so fuck yeah.
Whoa. But I'm sorry, but to highlight that point, I think it's a really important point that, you know, the incredible things that we need, we also have to figure out how do these investors get paid back. So anyway, I'm so sorry.
No, thank you, James. I represent a company called Aerotech. We're federal first services, about 15 years, small business, and we've entered the commercial space with agentic platform for procurement. Looking to solve that procurement problem. The question I have is just to gauge your temperament on open source, right? So we know we need to compete with nation states like China against tech. They've adopted open source. They've actually impacted our media and markets with their open source, propaganda. So my question is, what's the temperament about companies that don't use proprietary software or don't use patented software anymore? We have a patented platform, but generally adopt open source to be faster to market, faster to scale, right? Faster for adoption, especially in the dual use context for DoD?
I guess it depends, kinda. You know, if you're, you know, Red 6 and you're building autonomy software to put inside of a jet, they probably don't want your core functionality to be open sourced, right? However, if you talk to the Navy, the Army, and you say, hey, I'm building a USV, they want you to be able to take whatever they want to give you as a data feed. So you need to think about so I'm not going to really answer your question because I don't have a specific answer, but you should think about, as you build your software, being able to integrate whatever DoD wants you to integrate. So if you're building autonomy, you should be able to take any autonomous navigation platform, any sort of GPS-denied environment, any sort of radio package that the Navy, the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, Spacecom, if they say, can you integrate this, your answer should be yes. Because the future will be this combination of different best-in-breed pieces of software. There's a company called Overland. They have an autonomous software. We did not get in the deal. We tried. We were kind of late to it. You know, one might argue for open terrain at a speed in excess of 70 miles per hour, nobody can do what Overland does. So, like, why would my other company that's never going to go quicker than 25 miles per hour go rebuild that software? If DoD likes that autonomy stack, why can't we just integrate that autonomy stack? So I think, you know, the answer is not a great answer for your question, but I think you should think about being able to integrate with other platforms.
I've heard it said a lot of times that we don't have a technology adoption problem. We don't actually really have a technology like purchasing problem. It's really in the integration. And we don't buy because we know we can't integrate, or we need more people, or we need to go to the primes to be able to integrate, and it ends up coming down to like a real integration problem in order to scale it.
Yeah, I think the problem that a lot of our great companies run into is, you know, all of a sudden you built a software system and now DLA goes, great, we want to roll out 135,000 licenses. And you're like, oh, wait a second, I can't actually do that, right? Like, I can't support that. I'm a seed stage company. And then what happens is then the client goes, well, okay, let's call Booz. Booz will figure out how to do it, and then maybe Booz goes and licenses it. So, you know, the other problem we have is this like mix match between like when you build a great solution and then your ability to actually deploy that solution to something like the US Army, kind of a big organization. So I think one of the challenges we have here is getting to scale, and that's where different SBIRs and different non-dilutive funding, where you're specifically working on a solution where you know there's a customer at the other end of the road, I think that gives you a better chance of winning.
And I think this this conversation is going to accelerate just because of the DeepSeek, you know, implications around this. And obviously that your situation is different, but and it depends whether you're talking about at a national level, i.e. sort of the government buyers, or the company's level. The incentives are obviously different, but I think the answer should be that you should default open unless there's a really compelling reason not to. And I think the reason for that is that there's just more power. Wikipedia is Wikipedia not because it's Wikipedia, but because it's open, right? And that's why it beat out like the online Britannica and so forth. So that's the classic example. In the current context, which DeepSeek has brought up, and forced Sam Altman to almost sort of, you know, revisit their whole model, is around this question of, you know, what is in our sort of strategic best interests, whether it's open source. And, you know, the strategy we tried around AI, to some effect, and I think this is very debatable, was a small yard, tall fences, right? That's what the CHIPS Act was. It's let's keep the technology here, and we'll keep the gap, we'll keep the advantage, and we'll stay ahead. And then DeepSeek was like, well, wait a second, is that working? And I think, and this is the conversation that's going to be having in weeks and months, I think one of the implications is small yard, tall fences isn't working. Instead, we need to think about just running faster, right? And I think open source is one way to sort of run faster instead of building walls. But your question couldn't be more pertinent. I know you meant it from like the company point of view, but it's an incredibly important question.
And we have just time for one more. We're running up against it, please.
It'll be a good one.
Yeah, so I'm a once upon a time warfighter, F-18 backseater guy in the Marine Corps, now a Washington lawyer, right? Part of the problem. And so integration, I think the greatest barrier to integration, there's a technical problem, and we're saying maybe it's to lean open source and then secure that open source as long as it's integrated, right? But there's also a problem in the regulatory and then the political sphere. We build weapon systems the way we build the weapon systems because every congressional district has a say in how we build the weapon systems. We fail to have regulations that are navigable because we have a sense that there's a Chinese threat and we have to regulate against it, but then, you know, the greatest technical companies are trying to navigate a regulatory landscape that they're not set up to do. And I think that the people up here have been talking about being Sherpas in that world, but so the question at the end of this is, how are we going to get through that? What are going to be some of the keys to getting away from the political and regulatory barriers so that we can solve the technological problems?
I
What a
don't-
way to end. No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. We'll tell from the lawyers. Bring it home. So I don't know that I foresee a short-term getting away from some of these regulatory barriers. It's like you said, it's built into some of the systems. It is built into our defense contracting infrastructure. I think that there are places where we should be able to incentivize technology, smaller companies, all of the things that I think enables more speed. But I think from a regulatory perspective, some of the big primes and the quote unquote Beltway bandits are like, they have become really, really good at the regulatory part of this. They've become really, really good at lobbying so that the regulatory part stays the regulatory part, because in lieu of a key differentiator, they're really good at RFP writing and making it so that the laws stay how the laws stay. I am very not optimistic that we get through so that Congress is passing bills on time, that we're not working within a CR constantly, that the companies here across the board are not in a place where, you know, every single year you're worried about the funding lines and is this a new start? Is it not a new start? If it was part of a pilot program last year, is it a new start? Is it not? Bring in the lawyers. I think that some of those challenges are likely to persist. I think that they are some of our worst challenges in our race against our pacing threat. So I really, really do think that funding the government in this way is not the correct way to fund the government, and ensuring that, and in continuing to ensure that companies that don't have really good line of sight on payroll and on how they're going to be able to grow their contracts are going to want to stay in the market forever. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done there. I just don't know that it's all happening in the right direction right now.
You know, this might seem like I'm broadening it, but you know, I think we need to think macro. What does it mean to be in NATO? What does it mean to be an allied country? What does it mean to be part of the defense supply chain? You know, maybe we should be buying lasers from Finland, right? Because of 25 years of, you know, our Lincoln Labs people going over to Finland to work for Nokia to do optics. Maybe we should figure out how to build brushless motors in the top 3 ally countries in South America and use the Ex-Fam Bank to fund factories built in those countries, create a path to immigration where you work in, you know, Uruguay for a year in this factory building a brushless motor, and you can now immigrate to the US, and when you get to the US, guess what? We have you a job in a brushless motor factory, right? Like, there are smart things that we can do if we just pull our head out of the ass and look around the world and be like, you know, we're a country of immigrants. Why are we being such unbelievable pricks to the immigrant population, right? Like, it's so insane to me. But I think the difference is We can all make our own difference by finding the right partners, by finding the right places in Australia, in the UK, with really, really smart people that are doing the same things that might help us fix parts of the supply chain. And I think when it becomes more of a global NATO problem, that forces some of the change that might have to happen in DC.
Yeah, one of the great things about being a DC person coming to San Francisco for an event like this isn't just that it's a veteran group and I feel like I'm with my tribe, but we can make it to minute 59 of a panel like this without mentioning the word Doge.
Until now.
Which would never happen
But
in DC.
brushless motors.
One more time.
Brad's absolutely right. You know that you know I think there's an understanding among the regulators and the legislators. And you know, Brad and I were invited part of a group of investors that went into the White House when they were drafting the national security strategy on AI, because they're trying to fine tune and calibrate like how loose does the regulatory thing go before it gets reckless. Like how do you make the barriers to sort of private innovation as low as possible, but still be responsible as a policymaker and a regulator? And that's a hard thing to do. But I think in general, the understanding, and it was true in the previous administration, and I think it's even more true in this administration, I think what the DOGE is going to do isn't so much as cut and slash budgets and workforces, although they're clearly doing some of that. I think what they're really going to end up focusing on is sort of the regulatory stuff. And I think that's part of a broad trend. And I think it's under the right sort of motivation that is, again, understanding that we have to get out of the way of the private sector's ability to innovate with technology and do it with our partners and build and expand upon those partnerships and be an enabling part of that system, not something that seeks to regulate. And I think it's hard to see, and you can, like, it's in fits and spurts, but I think it's moving in that direction, and it will continue, and that's a very, very good thing.
Excellent. So we are way over time, and Tim's here to tell us that right now.
We just want to thank you all for taking the time. Justin, all of JP Morgan, Meg, Brad, and Jeff. Round of applause for our speakers.